In the last section, we spoke about the series of steps that we're going to go through to get our first container up and running on Kubernetes. So the first thing we're going to do is double check Docker Hub and just make sure that our image is up there for the multi-client image. All right, so to get started, I'm going to open up a new browser tab and I'll navigate to hub.docker.com. And once over here, I'll look at my list of repositories and just verify, yep, my image is up here, Stephen Grider / multi-client. This is the repository that contains the image that we want to create a new container out of on our local Kubernetes cluster. Okay, that was easy enough. So I'm going to close that tab. And we're now going to move on to our second task, which is to make one config file to create our container. Now, to make this config file, we're going to create a new project directory. We're going to open up our code editor inside that project directory, and then we're going to start writing a little bit of configuration into it. All right, so I'm going to flip on over to my terminal. You'll notice that I'm back inside of a workspace directory of sorts, so I'm no longer inside of that complex folder that we had been working in previously. Out here, I'm going to make a new folder called Simple K8s. The term K8s is a little abbreviation for the word Kubernetes, and you'll very frequently see the word K8s in place of Kubernetes in a lot of documentation. The 8 in there is meant to represent the 8 letters between K and S in the word Kubernetes. Okay, so I'm going to make that directory. I'll then change into it eventually. There we go. And then I'm going to start up my code editor inside that directory. All right, there we go. So now inside of here, we're going to make a configuration file. And remember, the ultimate goal of this file is to create our container inside of our local Kubernetes cluster. So inside my code editor, I'm going to make a new file called client-pod.yaml. And then inside of here, we're going to list out a little bit of configuration to create our container. Now, I'll be completely honest with you. I want to be like as transparent as I possibly can. These first dozen or half dozen videos on the topic of Kubernetes, this is the 5th time that I've gone through and recorded all this stuff. So I've recorded 4 times already and deleted everything because I just wasn't happy with it. So in this this run through of recording this stuff, we're going to do things just a little bit differently. We're going to write out all the configuration inside this file, and we're going to write out all the configuration inside that second configuration file as well. And then once you see all this configuration in front of you, we're then going to do a real big discussion and talk about exactly what every line of this configuration means. Now, like I said, kind of recorded this stuff like 4 times, and I'm convinced that writing stuff out is probably the best way to expose you to this. So the good news is we're going to learn exactly what's going on inside these 2 configuration files. The bad news is that you and I are going to do a pretty good amount of typing right now. So as usual, I got to ask you, please triple check your spacing, triple check your spelling, make sure you got everything dead accurate the same as I. Otherwise, you're going to run into a little bit of issues down the road. Okay, so let's get to it. Inside of here, I'm going to first type out API version :v1. I'll do kind pod. I'll do metadata. And then I'll do an indent and say name is client-pod. I'll say labels. And then I'll indent another line and do component : web. Then I'm going to go all the way back out. So no more indentation. I'll say spec containers, and then I'll do a dash to indicate an entry inside of an array. I'll say name client, image of your Docker ID, so Stephen Grider from me / multi-client like so. Now remember, when we put in this image name right here, that is assuming that our image is up on Docker Hub. If your image, for whatever reason, for multi-client is not on Docker Hub, you can always make use of my image name, which is, or excuse me, my Docker ID, which is Stephen Grider. I'll then list off my ports that I want to open up for connecting to from the outside world, just as we did before over inside of our Docker Compose file. I'm going to have a single entry here, and I'll say container port is 3000, like so. Okay, so that's our first configuration file. Now, again, I got to ask you, please, I'm begging you, triple check your indentation, triple check your spelling on what you have. And once you're happy, we're going to create one other configuration file that's going to do a little bit of networking setup for us and make sure that the container that we're creating with the first configuration file will be exposed or available to the outside world. So inside my code editor, I'm going to make another file. I'm going to call this one client-node-port.yaml. Okay, and then inside of here, we're just going to do a little bit more typing, and then we'll talk about what all this stuff is doing in more detail than you could ever possibly imagine. It will be great. Okay, so inside the new file, we'll say API version is v1. I'll say kind is service. We'll do metadata. I'll give a name of client-node-port. Then I'm going to unindent, so I'm all the way back out to the left-hand side, and I'll say spec with a type of node port. We'll do a ports array, so I'll do an entry in the array indicated by this little dash right here, and I'll say port is 3050. I'll do a target port of 3000, and I'll say node port of 31515, like so. And then finally, I'm going to unindent, so I'm back online with type and ports, and then I'll say selector is component:web, and I'll save the file. Now again, I gotta ask you, please, 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 triple check your spelling inside of here, triple check the indentation. Remember, inside of a YAML file, if your indentation is not perfect, the file will be misinterpreted and nothing is gonna work the way you expect. Okay, so that's all the typing we gotta do. Now we're gonna take a quick pause right here. We're gonna come back to the next section and we're gonna go over both these files in just tremendous detail. So quick pause and I'll see you in just a minute.